Lost civilizations or lost in translation. By the time Hapgood's ideas hit print, the story had outgrown the map itself. Newspapers boiled his theory down to a sensational riddle: either an unknown civilization charted Antarctica before the Ice Age, or every modern scientist had missed one of history's biggest coincidences. There wasn't much appetite for coincidence. Across lecture halls and late-night talk shows, audiences leaned toward the extraordinary. If an ice-free Antarctica had once existed, then someone must have seen it. And if they saw it, who were they? Hapgood's answer was as bold as his mathematics. He believed an advanced seafaring culture existed tens of thousands of years ago, an old world destroyed by catastrophic pole shifts. In Earth's shifting crust, he proposed that the planet's outer layer could slip over its molten interior like loose skin. Whole continents would relocate within months, shoving former tropics toward polar latitudes and burying cities beneath glaciers. Antarctica, he said, was once closer to the equator, home to humans who mastered navigation long before recorded time. The Piri Reis Map, in that logic, wasn't an anachronism. It was a fossilized photograph of that forgotten age, copied and recopied through millennia until it landed on Ottoman parchment. The theory electrified dreamers. Suddenly Plato's Atlantis looked less mythic and more geographical. Hapgood argued that when ancient stories spoke of a sudden flood or the falling of the sky, they were misremembering the crust slip, a global disaster wiping nearly everything clean except a few survivors clutching their charts of the old world. Those survivors, he suggested, sailed to Egypt, to the Andes, to Mesopotamia, teaching architecture, astronomy, and the mathematics of navigation to younger cultures that later took credit for civilization itself. Cue the montage of coincidences: the Great Pyramid aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree, Incan stone blocks carved with machine-like precision, seafaring myths from Polynesia to the Mediterranean speaking of lost homelands drowned by ice or flood. Hapgood wove them into a single narrative. He saw Piri Reis not as an isolated marvel but as a missing link, evidence that ancient science never truly died. Critics, though, were ruthless. Geophysicists pointed out that continental drift and isostatic rebound make Hapgood's quick-shift mechanism impossible. Giant tectonic plates don't just skid like loose shells. The energy required would melt the crust itself. Paleoclimatologists added that Antarctic ice cores stretch back hundreds of thousands of years, far older than any hypothesized civilization. You could move the poles on paper, but not in physics. Cartographers joined in. They demonstrated how the map's seeming accuracy came from projection distortion. The Antarctic coastline matched Queen Maud Land only after heavy stretching and selective alignment. Rotate South America slightly, they said, and you get the same fit. What Hapgood called precision was, to them, visual coincidence amplified by wishful mathematics. Even the U.S. Air Force analysts eventually acknowledged that the resemblance disappeared under rigorous coordinate analysis. Still, rebuttals couldn't kill the idea. For every diagram proving distortion, believers produced another enigma. Why did multiple 16th-century maps show a mysterious landmass beneath South America in roughly the same position? Why did separate mapmakers, Orance Fine, Buech, Orontius Phineus, draw similar southern continents with inner rivers and mountains later found under Antarctic ice? If they were all guessing, it was an awfully coordinated guess. Hapgood wasn't alone in his obsession. Around the same time, Jacques Bergier and Louis Pauwels, authors of The Morning of the Magicians, popularized the notion of a prehistoric master race wielding forgotten science. To them, the Piri Reis Map was less a document than a revelation, that humanity's memory stretched further back than archaeology allowed. Cold War audiences living under looming annihilation found strange comfort in that. If a civilization once rose and fell before ours, maybe humanity could begin again after another cataclysm. Ancient apocalypse doubled as modern reassurance. For professional historians, that cultural hunger explained more than the map did. They argued that people didn't want data, they wanted meaning. The idea of a lost advanced civilization reframed time itself. It promised that progress wasn't linear but cyclical, that somewhere beneath our foundations lay proof of earlier genius. Archaeology, with its sober timelines of chipped stone tools, suddenly felt inadequate beside tales of vanished astronomers and global cataclysms. Meanwhile, linguists picked through Piri's own notes. He never claimed to know the age of his sources, only that some were from the time of Alexander and others older than the flood. In Ottoman idiom, the flood meant antiquity, not necessarily an ice age. Translation inflated metaphor into evidence. What might have been poetic shorthand became, in English editions, literal pre-Diluvian testimony. Every lyrical flourish became a breadcrumb for believers. And misinterpretation bred feedback loops. One popular 196's magazine article quoted Piri as saying he'd used charts of ancient kings, which readers recast as proof of extraterrestrial contact, the kings reimagined as ancient astronauts. Soon the map appeared in UFO documentaries, its coastline glowing under dramatic narration. Lost civilization theories merged with alien influence. Perhaps the same visitors who taught Egyptians to build pyramids had mapped the planet from orbit. The Piri Reis parchment morphed from artifact into talisman, proof that someone, human or not, knew the world's design long before we rediscovered it. But inside universities, a quieter realization emerged. Even if every mystical claim evaporated, the map still demonstrated something profound. Knowledge survives chaos. Real fragments of Greek, Arab, and possibly older cartographic data had traveled through centuries of war, translation, and religious upheaval to resurface in the Ottoman court. Civilization in that sense was continuous. The legend of a golden age might simply be the memory of cultural relay. The baton of discovery passed from one empire to the next. So maybe there was a lost civilization, but not of superhumans, just of forgotten scholars whose libraries burned. Maybe the ancient mapmakers were Egyptian surveyors, Phoenician merchants, or Hellenistic geographers whose work vanished during Rome's decline. Their data might have drifted through Byzantium, through Arab astronomers, until it reached Piri Reis's table. If so, the wonder isn't that Antarctica was mapped early. It's that knowledge itself proved so resilient it could cross 2,000 years disguised as myth. Still, Hapgood's charisma kept the grander version alive. He lectured with near-evangelical energy, showing students overlays of the map against modern polar charts. Each coincidence drew gasps. To doubters, he said, "Science demands curiosity," a statement vague enough to be irrefutable. He died in 1982 without definitive proof, yet the community he inspired flourished online decades later, transforming his cautious speculation into gospel. Across forums and documentaries, the Piri Reis Map remained Exhibit A in the case for lost enlightenment. And maybe that endurance says something about us more than about any vanished age. Scientific rebuttals satisfy the mind, but mystery feeds the imagination. We can accept geological evidence that Antarctica's been frozen for millions of years and still wonder whose eyes first charted its shadowed coast. The legend survives because it scratches both itches, the thrill of contradiction and the hope of legacy. While academics dismissed Hapgood's pole shifts as fantasy, the cultural aftershock of his ideas lingered. Every time new satellite imagery exposed hidden mountains or subglacial lakes, headlines echoed his premise. The ice concealed a story, and though geology had the final word, myth kept the microphone. Every debate circled back to one question none could settle: whether those southern lines on Piri Reis's parchment captured memory or imagination. Maybe both. Maybe a sailor shaping continents from rumor accidentally linked his century to an age beyond remembering. Between ink and ice sits that unsolvable middle ground where faith, data, and longing all overlap. Meanwhile, new science beneath Antarctica was telling its own story. And what researchers were finding under the ice threatened to make the legend, if not true, then at least newly mysterious. Because while the map's accuracy stayed contested, the continent itself was proving far less static than anyone ever believed. What lies under the ice? By the 21st century, debates about the Piri Reis Map had moved from dusty archives to digital screens. But while arguments raged online, Antarctica itself was quietly revealing a deeper mystery, one bound not to parchment but to ice. Radar satellites were stripping away the continent's white mask, exposing mountains, river valleys, and hidden lakes beneath nearly 3 kilometers of frozen crust. And the more researchers saw, the stranger the comparisons became. Here was proof that the frozen world wasn't a static block at all, but a shifting, living landscape. A geography eerily reminiscent of the coastlines Piri Reis once drew in ink. Everything started with a ripple in satellite data. In the early 200s, scientists noticed subtle rises and dips in the surface of East Antarctica, as if the ice were breathing. Decades of radar observation confirmed what seemed impossible. Lakes of liquid water existed deep below, melted not by sunlight but by geothermal heat trapped under the weight of the ice sheet. These were the subglacial lakes, entire inland seas sealed in darkness for thousands, maybe millions of years. A handful were known in the 199s. Then came the satellite revolution. By the mid-202s, European Space Agency instruments had catalogued 231 active subglacial lakes, 85 of them newly discovered. That revelation rewrote what scientists thought they knew about the frozen continent. The lakes were not isolated pockets, but part of vast underground networks, arteries shifting water and sediment across hundreds of kilometers. Some drained suddenly, causing the surface above to drop by meters before refilling again months later. Others formed chains connected by meltwater channels that pulsed beneath the glaciers, lubricating their flow toward the sea. The result, a continent in perpetual slow motion, its hidden plumbing reshaping the ice from below. And while the discovery confirmed nothing mystical, it did echo one haunting aspect of the map. On Piri Reis's parchment, the supposed Antarctic coastline wasn't smooth. It featured bays, unfrozen rivers, inland ridges. For centuries, skeptics dismissed that as artistic filler. But now radar profiles were outlining buried valleys and ancient waterways beneath the ice sheet, terrain that might long ago have been open to the sea. It didn't prove the map's accuracy. Yet it raised the unsettling idea that the geography it hinted at genuinely exists beneath the ice today, invisible but real. Consider Lake Vostok, the largest of these buried seas, nearly 250 kilometers long, sealed under 4 kilometers of ice. When Russian drills finally reached its surface water in the early 200s, sensors detected oxygen levels rivaling Earth's oceans. The possibility of microbes surviving in such isolation thrilled biologists and astrobiologists alike. If life could endure under that pressure and darkness, maybe it could survive beneath the icy crusts of moons like Europa and Enceladus. Antarctica, once imagined as a dead wasteland, became a proxy for alien oceans. Then came an even larger revelation in 2025. Using a decade of Cryosat-2 radar data, scientists mapped an unprecedented expansion of known lake networks, particularly under drowning Maudland, the exact region Hapgood and Olmeyer had once claimed matched the Piri Reis coast. The coincidence was almost cinematic. Headlines screamed hidden rivers beneath Antarctica, while online theorists resurrected the 196's debate. Was science finally catching up to the map's impossible foresight? The truth was subtler but no less astonishing. Beneath the ice lay the Gamburtsev Mountains, a range the size of the Alps, completely buried and invisible to the naked eye. Seismic soundings showed peaks, valleys, and even possible fault lines vanishing under kilometers of ice. Their discovery in the late 20th century proved that Antarctica's foundation wasn't a flat desert but an ancient, eroded continent, one that before glaciation had rivers and plains not unlike any other. That revelation shifted the question from could it ever have been ice-free to when. Geological drilling revealed sediments from warm, forested epochs 35 million years old. Fossilized pollen hinted at temperate flora once covering the land. While that timeline predates humanity by tens of millions of years, it still underscored a key point. Antarctica had not always been a frozen void. It carried memories of water, vegetation, perhaps entire ecosystems swallowed by glacial onset. The continent in Piri Reis's imagination might have existed after all, not in human prehistory, but in Earth's own deeper past. Yet what truly unsettled researchers wasn't age but activity. The subglacial world turned out to be dynamic today. Water traveled between lakes through pressurized tunnels, sometimes draining immense volumes in days. When these bursts reached the coast, they could accelerate ice streams sliding toward the ocean, subtly altering sea level rise. The Antarctic plumbing system, hidden for eons, was influencing global climate patterns right now. Under that lens, the idea of a dormant continent waiting beneath the ice no longer sounded purely mythical. It was alive, shifting, and capable of changing the planet's future as surely as its past. For storytellers, this modern science blurs into legend. The mountains and valleys below the ice mirror the map's strange contours, hints of peninsulas, semicircular inlets, river deltas. Every new radar survey becomes a Rorschach test where believers see validation and scientists see complexity. Perhaps Piri Reis's ancient sources, whatever they were, recorded older coastlines distorted by projection. Or maybe his imagination accidentally traced the hidden truth, a truth no human could witness again until satellites pierced the ice half a millennium later. What no one disputes is the power of perception. The Piri Reis Map invited humanity to imagine an unmapped world. 21st century technology is finally delivering it. Each gigabyte of radar data, each seismic echo, adds to the portrait of a continent still withholding secrets. And with every revelation, the myth resurfaces. Maybe our ancestors knew more, saw more, explored more than we think. Meanwhile, geopolitics tilt southward. As nations race to build bases and claim research zones, sensors probing the ice serve dual purposes. Science above ground, strategy below. When satellites scan those hidden mountain ranges and lakes, they don't just map terrain, they chart potential resources, potential power. The world's last untouched frontier is becoming a mirror both for our curiosity and our greed. And that convergence makes the legend of the Piri Reis Map feel strangely prophetic. So here we are half a millennium after an Ottoman admiral inked coastlines he could not have seen, staring down images of the same buried geography through orbiting eyes. The ice is thinning, the politics thickening, and the line between myth and data keeps shifting. Modern scientists may not believe in lost civilizations, but the landscape beneath the ice still whispers like one, rivers that no longer flow, valleys resting under black water, mountains rumbling in subglacial dark. As revelations mount, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Antarctica isn't frozen history, it's frozen possibility. Every time a radar curl outlines a forgotten ridge, we edge closer to seeing what the world has hidden for tens of millions of years. And while that doesn't confirm any ancient map's prophecy, it does prove something equally haunting, that the planet itself still keeps secrets older, stranger, and far less static than we ever allowed ourselves to believe. Geopolitics of the frozen frontier. While the maps of the past stirred dreams of lost civilizations, the maps of the present are driving something far more tangible: power. For centuries, Antarctica existed as a blank space, a white void at the bottom of every globe, too cold and remote to tempt conquest. But that isolation is thinning along with the ice. Now the same continent that ignited myths of ancient knowledge has become a real battleground for modern ambition. It began as a pact of peace. In 1961, world powers signed the Antarctic Treaty, pledging to reserve the entire continent for science and cooperation. No armies, no mines, no borders, only research. For decades it worked because the environment itself enforced obedience. The cost of survival outweighed the value of anything hidden beneath the snow. But treaties age and technology doesn't rest. What satellites and icebreakers can reach, history shows nations will eventually claim. In the early 21st century, that quiet agreement started to buckle. Climate change was rewriting the rules faster than diplomats could renew them. Thinning ice opened sea routes once impossible. Drones mapped mineral signatures below the glaciers. Energy models hinted at oil, gas, and metal deposits locked under permafrost, resources every industrial civilization on Earth was beginning to covet. Almost overnight, the world's last untouched frontier looked less like a preserve for penguins, and more like the final unclaimed asset on the planet. China saw it first. In less than 2 decades, Beijing expanded from a single coastal outpost to 5 Antarctic bases, each described as scientific, yet some bristled with satellite dishes and long-range communication gear that conveniently doubled as military surveillance. Engineers framed it as dual-use civilian research with strategic benefit. But the message was clear: whoever commands the ice commands the data, and in the 21st century, data is the new territory. Russia followed suit, upgrading aging research stations into logistical hubs. Its vessel academic Alexander Karpinsky began extensive seismic mapping of the continental shelf, an act Western analysts quietly labeled resource surveying. When U.S. officials accused the expedition of prospecting for hydrocarbons in violation of treaty bans, Moscow simply called it oceanography. The result? A silent standoff disguised as science. Meanwhile, the United States maintained the largest continuous presence, flying regular missions to the South Pole and McMurdo Station. Publicly, those flights supplied research teams studying climate patterns. Privately, they provided aerial reconnaissance images of every new base sprouting across the ice. Washington's position remained officially moral, defending the treaty, defending peace, but beneath that posture lay a familiar motivation. If rivals weaponize information or access, the U.S. mustn't arrive late. The same paranoia that once fueled the space race now chills the polar wind. The first real flashpoint came not from armies but from krill. The tiny crustacean, pink, translucent, and abundant, is the foundation of Antarctica's food chain. It's also a billion-dollar industry for dietary supplements and aquaculture feed. In 2024, at a marine conservation meeting in Tasmania, China and Russia jointly blocked proposals to expand protected zones and limit krill harvest. Diplomats described it as a minor disagreement. Ecologists called it a warning shot. 2 superpowers had just coordinated to carve economic advantage into an ecosystem older than humanity itself. Behind every scientific facade lies strategy. Each new research outpost reinforces future territorial claims should the treaty collapse. Under article reviews scheduled for 2048, member nations can reconsider the ban on mineral exploitation. That date looms like a geological clock ticking beneath the snow. 48 years may sound distant, but in geopolitical time, that's tomorrow. Every runway paved today, every satellite uplink built under meteorological study, is a placeholder for tomorrow's ownership. Satellite imagery already reveals subtle expansion. Longer airstrips, hardened storage units, entire convoys moving supplies inland far beyond declared zones. Intelligence analysts interpret those footprints as positioning. After all, Antarctica's resource estimates read like a corporate dream: tens of billions of barrels of oil and gas equivalents, massive coal seams, rare earth metals critical for electronics, even freshwater reserves dwarfing the Amazon's flow. As warm season sea ice recedes, mining becomes less impossible each year. The last safeguard isn't diplomacy, it's logistics and cost. But the ice is melting faster than laws can freeze. In February 2025, Antarctic sea ice extent hit one of the lowest levels ever recorded, 187 million square kilometers, 8% below normal. Satellite sensors captured unprecedented surface melt events, nearly 4% of the entire ice sheet glistening with liquid water on a single day. To climate scientists, these numbers screamed emergency. To strategists, they whispered opportunity. Lower sea ice means easier access for ships. Easier access means feasible extraction. Every degree of warming redraws invisible borders. The old dream of Antarctica as a sanctuary is faltering under pressure from profit. Even the language used by policymakers betrays the shift. Where reports once spoke of research capacity, they now mention resource potential and strategic presence. When asked, officials insist the missions are peaceful. Yet militarization rarely begins with soldiers, it begins with infrastructure. Build habitats capable of supporting civilians year-round, and you suddenly have the groundwork for any occupation you like. Western observers call it the salami-slicing approach, tiny, legalistic steps that accumulate until the original treaty is irrelevant. Construct a new satellite ground station here, extend a runway there, deploy additional meteorological drones over disputed waters. Each slice seems innocuous, together they create control. And because every signatory technically adheres to the letter of cooperation, there's no violation to prosecute. Enforcement depends on consensus, and consensus depends on self-restraint, a fragile condition in an age of energy scarcity. Environmentalists warn that the ice itself may become collateral damage long before open conflict. Already krill populations are shrinking from simultaneous fishing and climatic strain. Penguins and whales face food shortages that ripple through entire ecosystems. The same nations pledging scientific stewardship risk turning the continent into another industrial frontier. Some researchers privately admit the irony stings. Humanity's first genuine cooperative experiment is degenerating into a resource rush visible from orbit. For historians of the Piri Reis legend, the parallel is darkly poetic. Centuries ago, a map drawn in curiosity hinted that Antarctica once carried open coasts and temperate waters. Today, geopolitics might achieve that condition again, not through ancient warmth, but through modern heat. What ancient nature froze, human ambition may thaw. And here's where the story loops back on itself. As satellites probe beneath the ice, governments interpret the data not as revelation but as inventory. The same drive that made Piri Reis stitch together forgotten charts now drives nations to compile the continent acre by acre, scan by scan. The motive hasn't changed: knowledge as leverage, exploration as prelude to power. So when you hear diplomats calling Antarctica the common heritage of mankind, understand what that really means: common until someone finds profit. The frozen frontier is no longer a dreamscape at the edge of maps, it's the next chapter of global competition. China and Russia planting their flags, the United States guarding its stations, Europe insisting on environmental virtue while eyeing mineral contracts, all circling a continent of silence the size of the United States and Mexico combined. The irony is almost cosmic. While public debates fixate on whether an Ottoman admiral glimpsed the uniced coast 5 centuries ago, modern powers are preparing to unice it for real. The legend of the Piri Reis Map once symbolized impossible knowledge, now it shadows a very possible greed, and the timing feels too precise to ignore. Just as science confirms new valleys and subglacial lakes, politicians see new resources and new borders. Strange timing indeed, considering a centuries-old map once hinted this land was far from lifeless.